Recently, I put out the second music video for my album Dead World Theory for the song called Cosmic Blue. I wanted to spend some time and talk about this song. One, because I really like this song, and also two, because I think I did a great job on the animation. Is it anything crazy? No. But as somebody who's not an animator, I think I did a pretty good job making like my first animation. When I started working on the animation, I was expecting it to end up totally different than what it did. I had completely different ideas for it, but because of the restriction of not knowing how to animate, I had to kind of make some give and take decisions there to keep my sanity. It worked a little bit. I don't know, this project was really hard. But like I said, very proud with how it came out. Cosmic Blue is definitely one of my favorite songs on the album. It features a college friend of mine, Payette, who's an amazing musician and especially vocalist. I'm not going to talk about it too much because I'm going to make a separate video diving into all of that, like how I made it, the meaning behind it, the concept behind it, where it sits in the screenplay, all that type of stuff. So if you want to know more about that specifically, either you're too early or there will be a link somewhere for you to go check that out after this video. The song was written and produced by me, and the vocals and lyrics were by my buddy Payette, like I said earlier, who's an amazing vocalist. Go listen to their music. My pugs are not happy out in the hallway. You can hear their little muffled grunts. I have to go figure out what's going on. Be right back. When it comes down to it, Dead World Theory is completely a story about contrast. It contrasts the space-dwelling Askia to the Earth-born Tomas. It contrasts high technology to low technology, ideological differences, and even within their own ideological differences, the different approaches that can be taken inside of those. I really wanted to juxtapose the music, the aesthetics, the ideas of this whole story against each other. It's definitely a story about, two sides of a coin. And so I wanted a music video that kind of did that as well. So when I was thinking about this, I also wanted to somehow contrast digital media, which I knew I was going to work in, and traditional or like physical media. So it took a little bit of grappling to figure out exactly what that was going to mean. Wanting to really contrast the different stories, Askia being born in space and living in this like highly polished, curated existence, I knew that I wanted to represent it in a more traditional or more archaic type of way. I didn't know exactly how that was going to pan out once I started conceptualizing it, but I ended up stumbling across it in a very interesting way. But I knew that there was supposed to be some type of contrast there between space and the future with modern time or even further back past. So Askia, being a space-born, soldier who's lived on this satellite, this metallic, polished existence his entire life, I knew I wanted to portray that in a very contrasting way. And I figured that the best way to use that would be using old stuff, which is kind of a roundabout type of thing that I figured out through some other projects. So I guess let's talk about what led up to this animation and where I got the inspiration from it from other projects. The year previous to when I started working on Dead World Theory, I was asked to be a part of a multimedia art show called Imposter Switch. It was a really cool idea and it was a really fun experience. And the conceit of the whole thing was that a bunch of artists of different mediums and different disciplines would get together, and our names and the genres that we primarily work in would go into two separate hats. And then a few weeks before the show, we would have our names pulled from the hat as well as another genre from the other hat, which is a really fun, novel idea because it forced us as artists who have experience in one type of genre to think about how can we transfer our knowledge or transfer our skill or our perspective from one genre to the next. So the mediums were chosen at random, and I got printmaking, which was kind of great for me. I studied visual art when I was in college because it was something that was really interesting to me, something I really enjoyed, and something I wanted to know more about. And I knew that maybe it wouldn't directly make my music better, but it could inspire me, or I could find inspiration from these visual artists or these techniques to find different ways to work on my music. One style that really stuck with me that I really, really appreciated and ended up going to like museum exhibits about was traditional Japanese woodblock printing. I loved that. It was a very interesting technique, and it was so striking to me because it wasn't just one single woodblock placed on it with one single color. Instead, it was almost like a composite photograph or a composite print where they would use different blocks with different detailings for each block so that each block would have its own color, and they would layer these different prints on top of each other. So if you were just looking at one print from one of the blocks, it wouldn't be much. Maybe it would just be the details. But layered all together, it would end up creating these strikingly beautiful, very full color pictures that I thought were amazing. Once I got printmaking in Imposter Switch, I knew that I wanted to do something inspired by that Japanese style because I loved it so much. And I started carving out all the blocks that I could. And it was an extremely fun exploratory process. And I think one of the reasons it stuck out to me so much is because it's a visual art that is all about layering and compositing, which I had some experience with working with digital photography and editing, like using Adobe. And that's all based off of like compository techniques, you know, layering stuff on top of each other. This is the analog version of what I've already done with photography, which was great. It was so hard. It took me so long to carve those blocks, and I wasted so many blocks because I would mess something up and have to restart. Physical artists, especially printmakers, kudos to you. Anyways, I wasn't happy with just printing these on a piece of paper. I did a couple of them and I looked at it and I was like, I don't love this. It's not my favorite type of thing. I could do something different. For the next couple of days, I was thinking about, could I do this on like a different type of canvas instead of just paper? And I was walking home from work one day and I saw a bag of books just sitting on the side of the road with a free sign outside of some business. I started looking at the books and they were all like mid-century books about mythology and nature and folk tales, and it was a really cool find, and it instantly inspired what I wanted to do with it. I was going to use these books to print my wood blocks on instead of just regular paper. Also, being an overachiever, I knew that I didn't just want to use these papers. So I thought about how can I kind of repurpose an original book, and I thought about blackout poetry. If you're not familiar, blackout poetry is where you take a page of words of text from a book or from a magazine. You black out everything except a select few words that you use to tell a story. And it's very fun. It's a very interesting style of poetry because you're restrained to only being able to use the words that are on the paper, but you also find that using even such a small selection of words, you can make impactful stories or poems. I dug through all those books. I found all the books about nature and mythology, and I started making blackout poetry out of them, as well as grabbing some pictures out of there that were really cool, old school black and white illustrations, pulled them all together based off of the theme that they would all be about nature or love. And then I printed all of my wood blocks onto those pieces of paper instead. And I think altogether I made 8 different prints where each print had a different page with a different poem or a different picture. I think they turned out really cool. You're probably wondering what this has to do with the animation. So now let's tie it back to the animation. Are you ready for this? Because I promise this actually was important. When I started brainstorming the idea for the animation, I knew that I wanted to do something kind of old school, like a flip book or a 3D pop-up book, one of those old school things from like my childhood. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do that, especially making all of the digital artwork myself. I'm not an amazing artist. And then I was cleaning out some art supplies. I stumbled across those prints that I made. And I realized maybe I could use physical media to make this pop-up. Maybe I can cut things together and do almost like a collage effect of this old school artwork into the music video. The same week, I think it was, the Royal Museum of Britain announced that they digitized their entire collection of old books from the 19th and 20th century. Century naming is weird. But it was perfect. Because my original idea was that I was going to have to find all of these books. I would have to buy books. I'd have to cut them all out. And then I was going to do it in like a stop motion style. That wasn't too feasible for me because at that time I was living with a couple of roommates and we were pretty limited on space. And if you've ever done stop motion, you know that you need a lot of space and you need something that will never be touched except when you're filming, because there's so many continuity errors that can happen. So my space didn't really allow me to do stop motion, which was the original plan of just cutting out this physical pieces of paper and moving them around that way. So I had to be a little bit creative. But then I find out about all these digitized books and it's like, oh, perfect. Well, instead of just collaging them in the analog world and cutting them out, I could just collage all of these things digitally with Photoshop, and then I'll just animate it using After Effects. That can't be so hard. I know how to do stop motion animation with a camera. It's like the same thing, probably. I was wrong. Anyways, we'll get to that part. So the original plan, make stop animation using cutouts from old books. So now I had an idea and I knew how I was going to execute it. I was familiar with stop animation, with camera work, and doing like school projects with that years ago. I knew that stop animation was very time consuming, but I figured not having to do it really frame by frame using something like After Effects, it would probably make the process a little bit faster. Even though I didn't know how to use After Effects, but I'm familiar with the Adobe ecosystem, and most of their programs kind of use the general same workflow and tools as each other. So being familiar with Photoshop and Illustrator and Premiere is like, how hard could it be? The answer is extremely hard. It was extremely hard. But I started. I cut out all of the assets from all these different books about space and astronomy and using Photoshop and put all of those in a file. And then I started doing all of the research that I could of how to use After Effects. And it is mostly like using Premiere Pro, but somehow it's just so different. I don't know if it's because of the UI or just I don't know what it was, but it is totally its own skill. I definitely undervalued how hard that program is. I really appreciate it now, and I know how to use it a little bit. It was a tricky learning experience. So I started animating with those 2D projects, and originally the idea was like a pop-up book, where you open the book and the pictures pop up to you and it creates a 3D field with all the different layers of pop-ups. That was too hard. I tried multiple versions of that and just could not get the 3D effect that I was looking for. I don't know why I couldn't do it. I was playing around with perspective, skewing the layers. I don't know. Couldn't figure it out. I knew that I had to try something different. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but something that I've always learned is that restriction or limitations usually ends up breeding creativity, and I've been taught that by a lot of my teachers. So instead of letting this discourage me, I was going to let this kind of guide me. What could I achieve? So I started looking into different animation techniques, especially with 2.5D or, mock 3D animations. And I stumbled across a very interesting era of animation that was created by Disney. In the mid-century, Disney came up with this amazing system to make their animation feel like it has more depth. Because they were animating on paper still, they were using 2D paintings and drawings, but they knew that they wanted to create this depth of field because of the rise of cinematography and using actual cameras, and they wanted to kind of reinvent what animation could be instead of just being flat. So they came up with something called the multi-pane design. So how this works is that they would draw all these backdrops and then they would cut out or redraw layers of that picture. So the foreground, the midground, the background, and they would each isolate a version of that depth of field. See where this is going back to ukiyo-e? Layering things together to make detailed, oriented pictures or animations. I told you that was going to come back in use. And then instead of just laying them all flat on each other, like in ukiyo-e, put them in these glass panes that were vertical so that they could space out the glass panes. and they put them on a pulley system or like a rail system so that they can move forwards or backwards towards a stationary camera. Usually in a cinematography type of setting, we would use a push on the camera, some type of trolley system or freehand push to kind of show that depth of field of the camera moving through physical space. Can't do that when the physical space isn't real. So what they would do is they would start with all of the panes closely pushed together and move those panes one at a time towards the camera. This creates the same effect as a push effect with a physical camera. It was perfect, especially because this was a composite-based animation technique using layers, which is exactly what Photoshop and Premiere is built around. So then I just had to figure out how to use the same layering techniques in After Effects, and it was off to the races after that. I had my inspiration, I had my assets, and I had my idea of what the video was going to start looking like for the most part. This whole project ended up being very doable. Not easy, not a walk in the park, but I was able to brute force my way through it. I leaned in towards my expertise and tried to strengthen my weaknesses everywhere that I could to get something that ultimately I would be happy with. However, there are a couple of things that had to drastically change as I was going through the process because it just was not feasible for my level of skill. One of those was lyrics. Originally, this music video was going to be like a lyrical music video where the words would also be incorporated into the actual story. And I was going to use the same idea of that blackout photography of using the words from these books to make the fonts so that they had that traditional old school look to them as well, instead of just using a typed font. I created those different assets, pulling that specific old school Times New Roman from these mid-century books, and I started animating them into the books as well. However, there's a lot of words in a song, and when every single word is on a different layer, it starts creating a lot of different layers, more so than I could comfortably handle, or I think even my computer could handle. It started becoming very time consuming loading assets in. My hardware just was not able to keep up with it, so I started reworking it and thinking about how I could kind of save that energy or save those processing. So I would turn off layers as they exited frame. I would try to do everything that I could to save as much processing as possible. It just wasn't working very well. When you have a song with, it's hundreds of words that are moving and have their own keyframes, things start getting pretty intensive on the computer. Another restriction that I had, but that's okay, because working with the lyrics, it was ballooning the time that was being spent on this, getting the words together, pulling the letters together to make the words, animating those, keyframing them perfectly, making sure that they interact with the other layers perfectly. It was ballooning the scope of the project so massively that it became overwhelming. And I kind of set the project down for a little bit, and I was worrying about other stuff as well, like the art gallery. I was in the thick of it, producing the art gallery for Dead World Theory at this time, and I had other projects I was working on, and it just wasn't feasible to keep working on this animation at that time. I knew I was going to come back to it, but I knew that I needed to pause. So I did, and I went and did those other projects, a couple of art galleries, a couple of shows, and then when I came back to the animation, I looked at it and I, kind of said to myself, is it worth continuing on with these lyrics? And that was a hard decision to make, because that was kind of one of the original ideas of the animation in the first place, was to be a lyric video. So it felt like I was almost giving up by cutting that part out of the video. But I had to talk to myself and really think about it. And if I wouldn't have cut that lyrical part of the video, I probably would not have finished the video. And that would have actually been giving up. And so, I took it on the chin and with humility and decided I was going to cut that part. Once I did that, the production of it was so fast and so easy because I had already learned so much with this specific workflow. Not saying I learned so much about After Effects, but this specific workflow, that I was able to breeze through the rest of the animation. no problem. So long story short on that part is know when to pull back, you know? And I think that's something that I've learned a lot in my career, and I keep learning, is that sometimes ideas may just not be feasible at that time. Doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, but you have to be reasonable. You have to have your choices rooted in a reality. So it was a little bit of a bummer, but ultimately I think it ended up leading to a better outcome. Who knows if I would have kept working on that in that form, if I would have ever finished it, or would have finished it by now. So all in all, the video's out in the world. I learned a lot from it. I had to accept my shortcomings and really lean into my strengths with this one, which is a very challenging thing to do as an artist, but you have to be reasonable with yourself. And I think that was one of the big lessons that I learned from this, was to accept execution over perfection. And I could have kept fiddling with this video for years and kept working on it, slowly plugging away, rendering it out. Would I have been happy with that? Probably not, because by the time I would have finished that version of it, I probably would have known so much more about animating in After Effects that I'd want to redo the entire thing, and I would have just start the cycle over, and it would have just been this vicious cycle of, oh, well, I'm better now, I should restart, redo it, oh, no, I'm better. And, you know, I've done that before on other things, and I know that that is a trap. And as an artist, we want to always do our best, but we also have to be aware that things may not be perfect. The world's not perfect. It's okay if our art's not perfect. And I'm sure if we look at a lot of the great artwork, those creators, those artists, there's probably a million things that they see wrong in every single one of their projects. Everyone's their toughest critic. So it was a very humbling experience learning that. But ultimately, I made an animated music video, which was a huge accomplishment for me. I had never done digital animation before, and now I have an entire 4-minute video. Is it super impressive? No. But the first time you ever do something, is it ever really that impressive? Not really. So I'm happy with what I learned. I'm happy with what I got out of the entire experience, and it taught me so much on animating, video editing, and just my process as an artist. All in all, I would say it was a huge success. And this video originally started as just a little blog post that I was going to write. I was expecting it to be a page long. And then as I started writing it, I realized I just had so many thoughts and feelings about this entire process that it just ballooned. I think the script ends up being like 5 pages long, which isn't that long of a script. Well, it's not even a script. This is a straight up essay. I did not format this like a script. Let's see. Yeah, it's 6 pages long in like essay format, single spaced. So this is definitely a cliffhangers version of what I wrote up. If you want to read my full thoughts about it that I put into this paper, go check out my blog. You can read it on my Patreon. It's completely free. The blog is completely free. You know, I want to say thank you for everybody who got to the end of the video and listening to me ramble about a stupid art project for, I don't know how long it's been now. This video will probably be 10-15 minutes long. I don't know. We'll see what happens in editing. But I just want to say thank you. I appreciate all the support that I've gotten. It's been a huge year already. We're only a month into 2025, and I am so happy with the results I've been getting. I've been working my freaking butt off, dude. I'm tired, boss. That like meme from Green Mile, that's literally just plays in my head every single day this year. The executive order to add an extra 20 days to the month of January was not cool. It feels like we're on the 53rd day of January. It's been a long year. So thank you. If you like what you're hearing and you want to support me, think about hitting up my Patreon. I have some free stuff over there, like my blog, where I dive into even more depth than this. You get a little bit more unfiltered ideas and thoughts that I have about this project. If you want to support me monetarily, because independent artists need that, hit up my Patreon or go to my Bandcamp, buy my album, subscribe to Patreon, buy me a coffee every month. That type of thing. If you want to support me, but you don't want to do it monetarily, I totally understand. Times are tough. Think about joining my newsletter. I send it out once a month. It also is a 2-way communication thing. So when you respond to that, it's not just going into the void like a MailChimp, like inbox void that will never reach me. I will actually get your responses. So if something speaks to you and you want to talk to me about it, respond to the email. I would love to have a conversation about it. Obviously, I like talking about art and not just music. So hopefully there's something there for everybody. And if you join the Patreon, you get all of this early, also unreleased music, additional music, scripts, shot breakdowns, sources, all that type of stuff. Yeah. Thank you again for making it to the end of the video, and I will see you next time.